difficult to describe. It's really a fantastic feeling.
Certain things have changed within me, I recognise, which are purely physical.
It's a very strange sensation. It's extremely hard to describe.
You can change yourself by just relearning how to move your body.
The vitality of the body is moving.
I've heard of it, I can't just put my mind to it. Well, is it something to do with the pedestrian flow of the marketplace? Or the traffic? I really honestly don't know, but I've heard of it somewhere.
So if you'd like to get yourself a cushion...
What exactly is the Alexander technique? A definitive description is impossible, as the technique involves a new experience, one of gradually freeing oneself of the domination of fixed habits. Any attempt to put that into words is necessarily limited, rather like trying to describe music to someone who's never heard a note. This program follows a group of students on an introductory course at the Fellside Alexander School in Kendal, Cumbria, and provides a fascinating insight into the world of the Alexander technique.
What I always hope to get out of this course, what I like doing, is just opening people up to what the technique can do for them. That's one thing. I think the technique is such a wonderful tool for human beings to use in terms of growth and development that it always excites me to work with new people and to introduce them to that way of working. I have very clearly in my mind a possible structure, or maybe 3 or 4 possible structures. I don't like to kind of write it off on the blackboard and say this is what's going to happen, because what will happen is dependent upon what happens within the group and where the interest lies, and we just have to wait and see how that develops. Basically what we'll do is, this morning I'm going to play some games with you to show you, in I hope a very clear way, that first of all that the way your mind works has a very direct effect on your body, and that by thinking in particular ways you can actually produce particular effects in your body. And what I'd like you to do is, I'd like you to think of the top of your head. Just let all your attention be in the top of your head, and I'm just going to give you a very gentle push. And I'd like you all to note just the amount of balance and the amount of force that I had to put into pushing her. So again, just think of the top of your head, and then I give you a little push, and that's very easy for me to push you over, and very difficult for you to remain stable. But now what I'd like you to do is, I would like you to put your attention right on the centre of gravity of your body, down here, where we were centering when we were sitting. And then I'm going to push you again. And you see, it's amazingly different. Yes?
Yes.
Could you all see that? Now, I'd like you each to experience that for yourself. And the lesson to be learnt from this is where we're paying attention, how we put our attention onto ourselves really affects quite markedly how we are operating. And especially, for instance, if our attention is out there in a great big bubble of thoughts about being in the Bahamas next year or something, that leaves the body in a very, very strange state. In the technique, we bring our attention back from bubbles about the Bahamas into ourselves, and we organize our attention in ways that can actually help the physical body. So I'd like you to play around with three things: putting your attention on the top of your head, putting your attention here at the center, and putting your attention right down on your feet, and just seeing the different effect that that produces.
Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. Forget all about being here and go and worry about something.
Got it now.
Right.
Now, if you'd like to just put your arm out to the side like so, and I'd like to keep your arm out there, and I'm going to try and press it down, and I just want you to keep it there. So you just keep it there, keep it there, keep it there, keep it there, keep it there. Okay, fine, and rest. Now, this time, I'm going to ask you to put your arm out to the side, but I want you to imagine it's a steel girder that is cemented into the wall over there, and that your body is another steel girder. So you've got a really strong structure cemented into the wall there. And now, don't let me press your arm down. Don't let me press your arm down. Don't let me press your arm down. That feels... how do you feel?
Yes, that did feel better.
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
And the point of this little game that I'd like you to play with another new partner is that the way we use our imagination and the creative parts of our mind also affects what happens in our body. And again, a lot of the work that we do in the technique is about not so much imagination, but thinking creatively into the body. And those thoughts, as I hope you saw and will feel with each other, produce a marked difference in the way that the body functions.
My name's Rod Gay. I'm from Cheltenham in Gloucestershire. I have done Alexander work before. I started off on a weekend course. I do hope to re-establish a link with Alexander work and to perhaps pull my whole life together into one single direction. Whether this weekend can do all that, I don't know.
There is no more restful position for the spine than the position that you're laid in. And ordinarily in life, the spine is under so much strain that if we're to start changing how the body works, it is the spine that we have to start working with. If we can alter what's happening in the spine, if we can get something good happening in the spine rather than the usual thing, which is maybe not so good, then we can begin to get changes in the whole of the rest of the body. But we need to start there. And so we arrange ourselves in a very particular way. So technically, this position is called semi-supine, or the position of maximum rest of the spine. And that kind of sets up the mechanical considerations of the body. But of course, we have work at another level to do, because in the technique, we lie down in order to do work. And of course, you're not trying to do anything to make it happen, but you're working with the thought of releasing on the neck to release on the spine. That's lovely. And just allow that to continue. That's beautiful. Good.
My sister said it had changed her life, so I thought, what's this? She said it had been the only therapy which had actually changed how she was physically, because she'd done quite a lot of osteopathy and yoga, and she said the yoga helped her a lot, but it was the Alexander that made the real difference. And she had sort of chronic stiffness and tension and awkwardness in her neck and shoulders.
That's nice. There it goes. Yunk.
It's as if you're going into a state of being passive enough to not, it doesn't feel like it's a physical stretching. It feels as if there are channels being allowed to open inside you, and that a lot of it is me allowing it to happen and not mentally trying to block it, but it's It's a very strange sensation. It's extremely hard to describe.
This rare footage shows F. Matthias Alexander working on a young Irish student in March of 1950 at his teaching room in Ashley Place, London. Alexander was born in Tasmania in 1869 and became a reciter of poetry and humorous pieces. It was as a result of habitually losing his voice during performances that he started to take more notice of his own body, its movements and balance. By studying himself in front of a mirror while reciting, he became aware that he was using his body wrongly. He noticed that every time he began to recite, he would pull his head back and in doing so depress his larynx. Although this seemingly strange posture felt quite normal, he reasoned that it would be sensible to remedy it, and so practiced until he could recite correctly without producing these strange movements and tensions. As a result, his voice improved, and he no longer lost it during performances. Alexander went on to train himself to breathe and hold himself better, paying great attention to his posture. He soon felt healthier and altogether more self-confident. Alexander then found himself encouraging and teaching others to do what he had found valuable, and the good results spoke for themselves. He went on to create a system based entirely on meticulous observation of himself and others, which encouraged people to unlearn the harmful or simply unhelpful habitual movements of their everyday lives.
Anything that he went to do in a deliberate way, he pulled his head and tightened these muscles at the back here in order to do it. And so he was in the business of teaching himself not to do that. And in the process, he realized, because he was quite a skilled horseman, he realized that it happened with horses as well, that if as a horse came to a jump, it tightened down the length of its back, then it didn't jump quite so well. If he could get the horse to really release on the spine, then both he and the horse would jump the fence together, especially if he too was releasing on his neck. And so he began to look at other animals and at other people, and he basically realized that whenever people go into action, they pull their heads back to do it. And what this means is that if we look at the skeleton, the muscles that actually support us and hold us upright are muscles that come from the back of the skull here and go right the way back and down and attach somewhere onto the base of the pelvis or down here on the base bone of the spine. Now, in order to perform well, those muscles have to be kept elastic during performance. But because of the demands of performing, and by performing I don't mean what I'm doing now, standing up in front of an audience, but, you know, simply asking a shopkeeper for something is a performance. You know, getting the breakfast ready is a performance in some way. It's an activity. And if we're to do that activity well, we have to keep this elastic release on the muscles of the back. If we shorten them, if I, for instance, go into this kind of situation, then for a while I can get by, but sooner or later, either I'm going to realize that my breathing is impaired, or my heart is impaired, or I just can't run as fast as I used to, or some indication like that will begin to crop up that things aren't as good as they might be. If we can get a release on these muscles, that constitutes what I call the primary freedom of the use of the self. The primary freedom of the use of the self means that there is an elastic release going on between the head as it balances on top of the neck, within the neck itself, and then all the way down the rest of the spine. One of the reasons we asked you to come and sit on the chair, and we could do it again, but I won't. If we put the chair so that you saw each other in profile, you'd probably see that every time everybody sat down, they would sit down like something like that. And the head would go back and the shoulders would come up, and eventually we'd sit in the chair and there would be all kinds of unnecessary tightenings and contortions going on up and down the length of the spine. If the spine is working well, it acts as one unit, and it continues to work as one unit, whatever we do, whether we sit or stand. We keep that length and that elasticity and stretch on the spine, and it simply naturally follows that if we do that, then the other functions in the body, like breathing, circulation, digestion, and so on, just begin to happen in a much more healthy and easy way. So we have to learn, and that's why we start with this lying down exercise, because if this is all tight down here, it leads to various kinds of bucklings and contortions and twists in the spine. And we have to learn to undo those. Whether you feel it or not, as you do that sort of work, a release starts to take place, an undoing starts to take place in this musculature, which is quite different to any other musculature in the body. You've got all the muscles associated with the arms and all the muscles associated with the legs and with the breathing. And all that is about moving. But this back muscle is about how we support ourselves in order to move. And if the support in ourselves for the activities we want to do is tight and buckled and bringing us into a bad state, then the actions will carry that kind of distortion with them. And for musicians, for instance, you can hear that distortion in the sound that's produced.
Alexander's techniques help me in many ways to lengthen my back and to widen my chest, so it's much easier to play my instrument. It's much more easier than I was playing it, say, a few weeks ago, so I was much crunched up.
Okay. Now, let's see if we can get this back of yours. Length of 2 bars. Now, play it again. If the body's working properly, and if the student is able to stay with themselves rather than going out towards the music, you know, looking at the music and going off the music, I find that everything is very easy. And that's the secret, I think. If playing an instrument actually looks easy, in other words, you're using minimum effort, then it is easy and it sounds easy.
Singers mainly have 2 positions to sing in. Now, I know there are many other positions to sing in for an opera singer, or perhaps for doing a work song, or when you want to sing walking down the street. But if you join a choir, or if you begin to sing songs or have singing lessons, you'll find that the general idea of teaching people to sing is that you teach people to sing who have a voice. Now, I put that in parenthesis because people believe they have a voice or not a voice, singing voice, that is. And using the technique, you can actually free that part of them which believes they cannot sing. The most common movement for a singer is that. That's the most common movement. It's the most damaging movement. It's also the most common movement. And it is accompanied by a quick intake of breath. So that is also going to be that. And if we're not going to do that, we do have to practice. Now, singing is strong enough when you begin it to actually unbalance you. And so you've got to experience being in a very, very good balance, which can't be interfered with when you actually begin singing. So a very good way is to lie yourselves down on the floor. And you can lie yourselves down next to each other. So you're a nice pair of people. You have to have something to sing. First you, Sylvie, have a little sing in that position. Nice little gentle sing. Dans les jardins de mon père, il y avait un rosier. Dans les jardins de mon père.
Well, I can tell you, the first time I had a lesson from Angela, it was in front of the whole group, and I was a new student. And I was in a complete panic. I just hardly could sing. And I think the technique has helped because I could actually face the camera, and I had a sort of tool to be able to stay with myself and to get back to my bag and to get back to my directions. And I think that was helping, even if I couldn't really do it well, but that was really helping to be able to stay on the floor and not panic.
Using the technique, you can actually free that part of them which believes they cannot sing. And you do that merely by stretching the equipment away from that panic situation, which always produces in people not only a rigidity, but a reduction in size. They actually become small people when they're in panic. Now, until you allow that panic to release, then you haven't got a singing voice. Now, the Alexander technique is the difference between having a singing voice and not having a singing voice. You can then begin, having released that and having released a singing voice, you can then begin to work on it. Let's take this into using music and using words. Let's take it into that. And let's sing a song.
Exercises with Angela, the Alexander technique really helped in a big way, as it enabled me to inhibit all the panic and nervousness that was trying to rise up in me, so that it didn't completely take me over, and I could actually stay with myself a bit more, think of my back, my neck, sending my feet down, and it really helped.
So we work initially to get this primary release, this primary freedom down the length of the spine. That's the first part of Alexander work, to say, can we actually get that release? Can we understand ourselves and get that happening? The second part of Alexander work, which is much more difficult, is to say, can we then keep that release whilst we do something, whilst we sing a song or play the fiddle, or argue for a pay rise with the boss, or whatever. And that is slightly more difficult. But in order to help in the first part of the process, I find it useful to constantly remind myself about some very simple anatomical things about how the head balances on top of the spine. And the first thing to say about the head is that it's heavy. Your head will weigh somewhere between 8 or 10 pounds. And if you think of that in terms of bags of sugar or potatoes, then you see that's quite a heavy weight. And yet one of the tricks that the mind plays on us is that our head doesn't feel like any weight at all. It doesn't feel like we're having to do any work to carry the head up there, but we are. And especially at the time that we're learning to move, as a baby in its first year or 2 years of life, the head, the size of the head and the weight of the head compared to the size of the body and the weight of the body is absolutely enormous. And if you watch babies learning to move, it is like their head leads, and they see something with their eyes and they want to go, and their head is, this heavy weight is taking them in the direction of whatever it is they see out there, and the body just has to follow the head. And that's really how it is with all movement. We learnt to move by the head leading the body when the head was a lot heavier than the body, than the body of an adult. And our moving reflexes are still dominated by this weight on top of us, moving in the direction in which we want to go.
You sit down. And we're just going to work on taking all your partner's weight, supporting all of them. And the reason for being sitting is that you've only got the top half of their body to worry about. What you're trying to do is to develop as much body intelligence as you can, so that you have an intuitive response to whoever you're presented with. You know, you can't just go through certain procedures with the arms, the legs, the head. And the more you get to learn about your own body, and your own body not just in still and not in the usual kind of sitting, standing, walking, but in all kinds of disoriented positions, then the more you're developing your body sense, your body intelligence. The point of that work is that you don't actually think about how you're going to move, you only think about the problem of shifting weight, and then a whole lot of movement emerges out of that. And you learn all kinds of things about your body and about how anatomically it functions, just because you're dealing with all these problems. It's like doing anything like trapeze or anything that puts quite a lot of stress on the body.
If, for instance, we take this edge as the length of the spine, if I just put one curve in it, like the primary curve, then you see this material, this plastic, has a certain amount of elasticity in it, but it's very weak and very wobbly. It's very kind of floppy there. But if I put two curves into it, then you see immediately a kind of stiffening and a strengthening happens through that length. Can you see that? And if I was able to bend it so that I could put even more curves in it, then there would be, in response to any compression, there would be even more elastic recoil. And if I was able to get all four curves in, like the spine, then in response to the compression, there would be a very, very strong elastic upward recoil. Can you see that? Now, that upward elastic recoil can only happen if the musculature of the spine is elastic enough to allow it. For instance, here, this edge represents the length of the spine, and we have two counterbalanced curves there. And gravity is giving weight to the body and pressing down, like so. But if the muscles down the length of the spine tighten to hold it in that place, then it doesn't matter how elastic this piece of plastic is, the tight muscles holding it down like guy ropes aren't going to allow it to spring up again. Can you see that? So, one of the things that we have to do is to allow an elasticity in these muscles so that when gravity presses us down, our muscles are elastic enough to allow us to spring back up. And in the technique, we talk an awful lot about up energy. And that basically is one way of explaining what up energy is, that we're allowing the natural springiness and vitality to rise up the length of the spine, and not to deny that kind of vital springiness right at the core of ourselves by collapsing and pulling down and making ourselves really heavy. So if we come back to the discs now, again there is compression, and this time a different kind of effect. With compression, the fluid is squeezed out and they become less and less bouncy and less springy. But in 20 minutes, and that's why I was saying to you just before the break, we recommend that you lie down something for 15 to 20 minutes, then the springiness within the disc itself can return because it's being bulked up. The pressure is off, and so it can soak up body fluid and bulk up, so that we've got then two things working for us. We've got the elasticity of the muscles, allowing a recoil, an upward recoil of the curves of the spine, and we've got a general squidginess in the vertebra. So it's kind of two ways of working that we need to have on ourselves. One relatively passive, just that we lie there and allow the pressure, the reduced pressure, to allow the fluid in. But another is much more to do with the kind of thinking that we've been talking about, which puts us in touch with our muscles and allows the muscles to release so that this recoil can happen through the curvature of the spine. And that is a very vitalizing, a very energizing feeling. And what all this means in practical terms is that we need to think about the timing, the timetable of a particular day. If, for instance, we wake up in the morning, we've been laid in bed horizontal for several hours, and so the discs are really quite well bulked up with fluid. They're quite nice and thick, and you can almost draw a graph. If this is time, and this is the thickness on the disc here, when we wake up in the morning, we'll have really maximum thickness on the discs. But you get up and you stand up, and immediately you stand up, you start squashing the discs, so they start to get thinner, and you go into the bathroom and you get washed and all this kind of thing. You go and have breakfast, which is sitting, which is still vertical, so there's still pressure on the discs. And then you go to the office and you sit. And then it comes lunchtime, and by lunchtime you're feeling a little bit fatigued. Now, one of the things that gives you a feeling of fatigue is the sensations of fatigue that are coming from your spine. But at lunchtime, what do we do? Or at coffee break time, we don't actually put ourselves horizontal and change this situation. We go and sit again in a chair. And there's an awful lot of work been done on pressures on the discs in different positions of the body. And for instance, if you sit slumped in a chair, then you are creating 3 times as much pressure on your discs as you are doing just in normal standing. So you're not actually resting your spine if you sit down at coffee break time or at lunchtime. You actually need to put yourself horizontal. If you don't, then this situation continues and continues and continues. And eventually, you get to a stage where, if this is repeated day after day after day, you go below a kind of level of clinical normality for the kind of fluid condition of the disc. And this is where the disc can start to break up and deteriorate, and eventually you get, one way or another, you get a kind of slip disc condition. But if at lunchtime here, instead of sitting in a slump position to have your bacon and egg sandwiches, you decide to lie down in semi-supine, then in about 20 minutes, the graph reverses itself like that. Very, very speedily, in that 20-minute period, the discs soak up an awful lot of fluid and they restore themselves very, very quickly to a workable and healthy thickness. And then you can do a little bit more work and so on, and then maybe in the late afternoon you can lie yourself down again. So these would be 2 periods of lying down. And what they're doing basically is keeping the level of the disc above danger level, keeping the thickness of the disc above danger level. So it really is quite a vital practice to the healthiness of the spine. And in lots of cultures that are much more natural than ours, they live a lifestyle which enables them to lie down in the middle of the day. You know, they have a siesta or whatever. So what we recommend is that after, say, a morning's work of 3 or 4 hours, that you do lie yourself down. And you do all the work of lying down, and during that time, the discs will bulk up. So what we've got here with John is what we see with lots of people, where the natural curves of the spine are exaggerated, and in particular this primary curve here in the middle of the back, because he does a lot of work sitting at a desk, then we get this exaggerated curve here, which leads to a collapse in front. And that's then counterbalanced by this tight curve in the lower part of the back here, and the bottom end of the spine, the sacrum bone here, tipped up like so. And the effect of that is simply to shorten the whole length of his spine. In fact, the whole length of him. He's an inch, maybe 2 inches shorter than he need be. If we work with him, then we'll get the spine lengthening, we'll get the curves coming into a more harmonious state. What also happens because of this rounding here is that the shoulders are dropping forwards. And again, this is because he works at a desk and so on. And so all the use of the arms is forwards and down in front of him. And so there's this tremendous collapse here. And again, this leads to a collapse here and a protrusion of the gut in front. Again, if we get the length going on the spine, then all these will start to sort themselves out and come back into a more harmonious balance. First of all, if you can just think of freeing these muscles at the back of the neck and just allowing the neck to come back and the head to go up, roll slightly forwards to go up. That's nice. That's it. That's it. And just to make sure you're not getting too fixed in thinking inside yourself, just have a look out and around the room.
I think after 41 years of being on this planet, and suddenly realising that you're doing everything wrong, and it's very difficult to readjust. It'll take another few years just to get acclimatised again and to learn to move properly. I taught yoga for about 5 years. That was another discipline. And with that knowledge and the knowledge of Alexander, I hope to actually come out of it more fully informed of me, hopefully.
So maybe if you'd just like to sit down, we'll just see how things are for you in sitting. Yeah? Okay, just bring yourself up into standing, and then just sit down in the ordinary way, in the way you'd ordinarily sit down. Right, fine. So, as you can probably see, as we're working, gradually the exaggerated nature of these curves is beginning to disappear. They're beginning to relate to each other in an easier way. And as a result of that, the shoulders are finding an easier position to sit nicely on top of the rib cage. And also we're beginning to get the gut here connecting nicely into the back and not dropping forwards quite so much. And that happens just from working in standing, but working also in movement, and that's why we use the chair. We're not actually teaching people how to sit and how to stand, but we use the movement between sitting and standing and standing and sitting as an opportunity for the pupil to work on themselves, organizing their body while it's moving. So, I think you should be able to see there that in just kind of quarter of an hour's work, there's really quite a marked change in that. The giving of directions is the way in which we create changes that bring us out of a confused state and into a more harmonious state. And Alexander, his genius was that he devised an incredibly simple way of doing this, which his first students called the HNB pattern, head, neck, and back pattern. What Alexander realized was that there is a relationship of the axis of the body, which means the vertebral column and the muscles associated with it, and the way the head balances on top of that, which if we can maintain this relationship or this condition, it actually facilitates every other thing that we as human beings, not incidentally human beings, but all vertebrate creatures, if they can maintain this freedom along the length of the spine and this freedom of the head balancing on top of it, every other single thing that happens in your life happens more easily. And we relate that in a practical way to other movements, but it's also true that other things like blood pressure, like breathing, like digestion, like the confusion of hormones during a monthly cycle or during a lifetime, for instance, all those things become more harmoniously balanced because this central axis is supporting the whole framework of the body in a loose and elastic way. If that central axis collapses, all the functions of the body tend to be interfered with and diminished in their effectiveness.
A lot of people start walking with their pelvis, so it's like something like that, you see. You lead with your pelvis. That's the more common way in which people walk, and that allows the whole body to get collapsed down onto the pelvis. If you allow that forwards and up, that lengthening of the spine, to lead you into walking, something different happens. There's an elongation through the body all the time. However, that doesn't mean, which is what Jennifer was saying was happening, that you end up on your toes. It's not that we want this, because just as much as we want the head to be going forwards and up, we want your weight to be going back and down through the heels. So if you now stand and really think about the weight going down through your feet, so that there's slightly more weight on the heels than on the front of the feet.
How was that?
Yes, that was better. I felt I was better at the beginning, and then it gradually lost it.
Stand your back behind. Think of the length coming out from your back. I think I felt I had to go from the initial walking, which with the teacher holding and settling your posture, became a little bit unfamiliar, and therefore I felt very awkward initially, but after a while, and with the teacher letting go and walking on your own, you could begin to feel more at ease.
It's as though you've moved without trying to move at all. You suddenly found that you've got across the room, or you've stood up or sat down, and feeling that I could walk very naturally without it requiring a lot of effort.
So there are 4 primary preventative directions. And the first is, and as I give them to you, I want you to think about them in your own body. The first is, I'll give you the exact word formula, and this has been worked out quite exactly in order to have the effect that we want. So the first direction is, let the neck be free so that the head can roll forwards and up. Let the neck be free so that the head can roll forwards and up. And the thing that prevents is the pulling of the head back. Now, that first primary preventative direction is linked to the second primary preventative direction by a linking phrase. And that linking phrase is, in such a way that. And that's a very important linking phrase. So, the first direction is, let the neck be free so that the head can roll forwards and up in such a way that it encourages the back, the whole of the rest of the back, to lengthen and to widen. So, we want the head to roll forwards and up in a very particular way. We want it to roll forwards and up in such a way that it encourages the back to lengthen and widen. We don't want it to go forwards and up in such a way that it does anything else. So if anything else is happening, then that's not what we want. And so you have to start again and think, well, what is this head forwards and up business? And that's the work that you have to do. We can help you, but actually what these directions, getting these directions to work for you in your framework, in your life, that is your work. And we essentially can't do that for you. We can give you lots of ideas and lots of help, but we can't make it happen for you. And I think it's very important that we don't try to make it happen for you, because the best thing about learning something is that you learn it yourself rather than that you're given it on a plate. So those are the first two directions. Let the head go forwards and up in such a way that the back is encouraged to lengthen and widen. And then the third direction appears to be something to do with the arms, because what we say is widen across the upper part of the arms. But really what we're doing is, by widening across the upper part of the arms, we're releasing the muscles that operate the arms from their tendency to clamp into the chest. And when the chest is clamped, then it compresses the heart and the lungs. So widening across the upper part of the arms is really about opening out the chest and opening out the breathing and giving the heart an easier time. Now, the fourth and last primary preventative direction has to do with the legs. And we really do not, in ordinary circumstance, understand legs. We create situations for ourselves where we spend a lot of time standing, and legs are not really designed to be stood upon. That might sound strange, but they are not. The legs are very, very delicate system of levers for moving us around the face of the earth. And when we've moved around and we've come to a stop, then one way or another, the best thing to do is to fold your legs up and either sit down or squat down. The worst thing you can do for your legs when you come to a stop is just to stand on them, because they will go stiff. And if you have a delicate system of levers, the springs and balances of which most of the time you're using in a stiff way, they're very, very soon going to stop being a delicate system of levers. And that's what happens with most people's legs. They become just rigid pillars to support us in a standing way. Now, to break that stiffness, to prevent that stiffness dominating how the legs function, Alexander, and he was quite brilliant in his insights into what needed to happen, he gave this direction, let the knees go forwards and away. And what that means is, Rod, if you'd like to come out here and just sit on the stool there. That means in sitting, for instance, that you can direct your knee, your thigh, spiralically with that kind of twist, so that you have almost a sense that your kneecap is going out towards the corner of the room there, and this kneecap, because the thigh has a spiral thought going through it, going out towards the corner of the room over there. Now, it takes people an awful long time to actually get their minds as far down as their kneecaps to be able to effectively give this direction. But for the sake of completion, I'm telling you about it, and it's something you can work towards. But this kind of thing that happens is in the middle of the second year of training as a teacher, a student will say, oh, that's what knees going forwards and away is, after 2 years of working on it day after day. It is really difficult to really get an understanding of what that means. But what it does is that it breaks up the tendency to either lock the legs back or to rotate the legs in. Or, I mean, that's the tendency, that's the feminine tendency. The male tendency is the other, that they tighten their bum at the back and they throw the back in and they tighten the legs out that way. And it just breaks up. The knees forwards and away prevents those habitual tendencies, whichever way they go. Okay, thanks. And so the final part of working with the technique is, we've been through all these processes, is finally to say, okay, well, we've done all this work, now, can we actually keep all those conditions whilst you sing a song in front of an audience, or whilst you argue with your boss for a pay rise, or whilst you explain to your wife why you're 3 hours late coming home?
So that I knew a certain amount about the technique, but that I felt that a lot of it had passed me by, and that I was still well, I really hadn't got hold of it at all. Now, I can't say that I feel I've now grasped the whole thing, but I would say that I now have a much more complete picture, more of a framework on which to hang what I do know about it in a theoretical kind of way, and that in a more practical way, that I am starting to experience something of what the technique is about. So I feel encouraged to go on with it. I realise that it's not an easy thing, not something which is going to come in a flash and there I have it, but that I'm started out on the road.
I feel I've been not only helped posturally and helped in my mental attitude towards my body and towards other people's bodies, but I've also been infected by the enthusiasm that the teachers here have for the Alexander technique. And people here obviously believe sincerely in it, and it's an educated enthusiasm, as the lectures have shown. And I feel that I'm going away as an enthusiastic devotee, if you like, of Alexander. I shall continue to take lessons, go on courses, and continue to practice Alexander.
It has taught me that I have got to have a reappraisal, that I have been doing a lot of things wrong with my body, and I'm very stimulated by it because I'm going to enjoy really thinking about what I've learnt and trying to apply it, and hopefully in my teaching passing it on to others.
The benefits are really tremendous. It's made a great difference. One gets quite religious about it. I've seen this pattern of going right down and just getting worse physically, worse mentally, worse emotionally, and having a lot of quite deep-seated stuff coming to the surface. And now I'm beginning to get the longer-term benefits.
I'm very grateful for the week. It's been a real eye-opener. I thought I knew more than I did about the technique, and it's a much more human process than I had decided it was. It's a very warm and caring method of dealing with people and dealing with yourself, and I think that's great. I think we need more of that, and I certainly do.